What do you think of when you think of Edgar Allan Poe? This image is probably what comes to mind, a seemingly depressed and wrinkled man that seems aged beyond his years. Poe is also known today as one of America's greatest writers, inventing the detective fiction field in literature and writing short stories that often dealt with dark topics. But why was Poe's life full of so much doom and gloom? Let's start with his birth. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 to two actor parents in the city of Boston. The first of Poe's many woes began when both of his parents died before his third birthday. Also in 1810, Poe's father had abandoned his family, and a year later, his mother died of tuberculosis. This theme of misfortune would continue to plague Poe throughout his relatively short life. He moved in with John and Frances Allen in Richmond, Virginia. John had a complicated relationship with Poe, sometimes spoiling him and other times aggressively disciplining him. John sent him to the University of Virginia, but Poe had to leave soon after John refused to pay Poe's gambling debts. Also, Poe's childhood sweetheart, Sarah Roster, ended up marrying another man, which further took a toll on Poe. Poe decided against returning to Richmond and tried to enlist in the army to gain some money. No, not that army. He also published some works of poems and other literature such as Tamerlane and other poems, but these garnered little attention. After getting court-martialed on purpose to get out of the military and having little financial support, he moved in with an aunt and his cousin Virginia. His older brother Henry also resided with them, but he died due to alcoholism. Poe, who was an alcoholic himself, tried to move away from the habit, but it would come back to bite him later on. Poe tried to become a full-time writer, but in those days it was kind of hard to do so. There was no international copyright laws, and many publishers did not pay their writers at all. And to add to Poe's misery, his foster mother, Frances, died in 1829, without Poe being notified of the funeral. He only found out after the funerary procedures had taken place, and once again he felt the loss of a mother. Only his often aggressive and aloof foster father, John, was left. Also, when John remarried and conflict erupted between his new wife and him over his illegitimate children. This caused Poe, who wasn't even legally adopted in the first place, to be disowned, and he did not get any of John's fortune as well to add to his woes. Throughout the 1830s, Poe continued to write works, send it to magazines and periodicals to be published, and also married his cousin Virginia as well in 1835. She was 13 and he was 27 when the marriage took place. Nowadays, it might seem like a strange practice to marry off cousins, but in those days it was all good. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket was also another major work that Poe wrote, about a whaling trip that went seriously wrong. Poe began to edit literary magazines and works, and wrote a couple of his own stories as well. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and The Raven were notable works written by Poe during this time, continuing from the late 1830s into the 1840s. The Raven gave Poe some fame, but he was paid a meager $9 for the work. Many of Poe's works were morbid and dark in nature, perhaps due to the continued misfortunes that befell him. He was fascinated with death and the procedures involved in them, as shown through his work. Poe tried to find some work in President John Tyler's government, but most likely due to alcohol, he failed to show up for the secretary meeting and did not get the job. In 1842, while playing the piano, his young wife Virginia Costa Blood, alarming Poe. She was in the early stages of tuberculosis, which had already claimed one loved one of Poe. Virginia died 5 years later, in 1847, leading to a worsening condition of Poe's alcoholism and depression. Poe became increasingly crazed and reliant on alcohol. He tried to court another woman, Sarah Whitman of Rhode Island, but his strange and eccentric behavior coupled with alcoholism broke off the relationship. Also, he reconnected with Sarah Royster from his childhood, although his family did not approve, as well as her family. Poe had returned to Richmond when all of a sudden, on October 3, 1849, he was found delirious in Baltimore. Poe was taken to Washington Medical College, but died 4 days later. To this day, no one knows the exact cause for Poe's death. He was speaking incoherently and wearing someone else's clothes when he was found. Rabies, syphilis, or alcoholism was all blamed for his death. Newspapers cried that he died of congestion of the brain, a vague phrase. On September 27th, before his death, Poe had left Richmond, bound for Philadelphia. However, he never made it to his destination. It was noted that he repeatedly cried for a Reynolds shortly before his death. He was also rumored to have cried, "Lord help my poor soul," before his death, a phrase that came after a life of failures and setbacks. Poe's series of unfortunate events did not even end with this mysterious and disgraceful end at the age of 40. A prominent literary rival to Poe published a harsh and stinging obituary of Poe full of exaggerations and falsehoods intended at demeaning the writer. Many will be startled, but few will be grieved by the news. He had very few friends, and he was the friend of very few, if any, Rufus Griswold wrote in the obituary. Griswold, whom Poe had criticized, stated that Poe was a womanizer and a drunkard. Griswold also used some letters written by Poe to say that he had no morals and was friendless. Poe redefined the literary world, stating that writing could be a profession and not merely a hobby or a pastime. Although he essentially failed at winning enough money to live comfortably off writing and was often reduced to begging, Poe did start the field of writing as a permanent career. He also invented detective stories, paving the way for Sherlock Holmes, and also dabbled extensively in short stories. And Poe became more well-known in Europe than the United States, a rarity for American authors at the time. Even if Poe led a somewhat unusual and depressing life, it is heartening to know that decades later, his legacy and works can be fully appreciated. Fun fact: Poe was obsessed with cats. Sorry, dog lovers. Fun fact 2: Poe was going to use a parrot instead of a raven in his famous poem, The Raven, but failed to get the right mood for the piece. Wonder why. Fun fact 3: Poe tried to kill himself 4 days before this picture was taken by taking some drugs. He was devastated over the death of Virginia. Sorry, that wasn't that fun at all. And that's our show. See you next time.